This is a short video discussing organizational structure. You'll see from the bottom right hand corner of the slide there are only 10 slides in this talk. The topic of organizational structure is dealt with in other videos on the course and in much more detail. This one is meant to be a gentle overview of the topic and could even be used as a part of revision, because it brings back some of the important issues that we need to bear in mind when discussing organizational structure. So to start, organizational structure should suit the range and variety of tasks. It's clearly the case that, for example, a large company will have a more complex structure than a small company. Let's say a large engineering company may have many departments. So the organizational chart for a company like that will show the person at the top, the CEO or the managing director, however the designation is dealt with. So there will be a person at the top, and then there will be functional heads looking after different departments. And under the functional heads there may be assistant functional heads of department, and then it goes to senior staff within department, and so quite a complex structure. If you contrast that with, let's say, a shop in a local town, the shop may have the owner who is working in the business and may have perhaps one helper within the business. That's a very simple structure. So the number and variety of tasks determine the structure of the organization. And that's the first thing we should bear in mind. There are different possible forms of organizational structure. Generally, businesses group staff and tasks into functions, and then functions into divisions. So if we consider larger companies, the larger companies will try to decide what functions they need to carry out. So they may have a manufacturing function, but they'll also have perhaps a finance and accountancy section, a marketing section, a product development section, an administration. They will have various sections within the business. And these various sections or functions may be grouped together into divisions. So the organizational chart becomes more complex. But organizing companies by functions is quite a logical thing to do. Clearly, the people who are engaged in manufacturing will have different skills and competencies and interests compared to the people who are, let's say, doing the marketing, who will again be different to the HR section. So it's logical to separate out by function. But we can classify companies according to that sort of complexity, the number of functions and the way the organization is structured. If there are many layers of management between the person at the very top, the CEO or managing director, if there are many layers between that person and the person on the shop floor, the person who's doing the work at that level, at the shop floor level. If there are many levels, many tiers of management between, we call it a tall organization. It's tall. If, on the other hand, the managing director organizes it in a way where there are not many layers between his or her position and the people who are performing tasks on the shop floor, if there are not many layers, then it would be a flat organization. And again, this is discussed in other videos in much more detail. Ideally, an organizational structure should minimize bureaucratic costs. So when designing an organizational structure, it should be borne in mind that the structure itself will need maintenance and will absorb some of the costs of the business. Will be the reason why costs of the business may escalate and increase. So It's important that in designing the structure, costs of the structure should be accounted for. Structures, if they are very complex, can be quite costly. Simple structures may be cheaper, but not as effective. It depends on the tasks and the variety of tasks. The point we made right at the very top of this slide. It depends on that as to the most appropriate type of structure. But if it becomes very bureaucratic and a lot of paperwork or a lot of communications, a lot of meetings required to maintain the structure, then it does become costly. And that will eat in, of course, to the profitability of the business. And this idea of flat and tall organizations I just mentioned should be borne in mind. If there are many layers of administration between the person at the top, the CEO or managing director, if there are many layers between that person and the people perhaps at the shop floor, if there are many managers in between, that's a tall organization. If it's flat, then the people on the shop floor would be nearer the managing director or CEO. There would be perhaps one, perhaps two at most, layers of management between that person and the person at the very top. That's a flat organization. So it's worth bearing in mind. As I said, it's the subject matter of other videos on the course, and it's worthwhile checking those in conjunction with this video. Allocating authority and responsibility. Well, there is a hierarchy of authority, a chain of command, if you like, which runs through the organization. The CEO or managing director is ultimately responsible for everything within the business. But businesses are complex, so he or she will delegate authority to others, and they will become managers of different functional areas. But they themselves may delegate some of their functions to others who will take on smaller tasks, but important tasks within that departmental structure, within that particular functional area. So there is a hierarchy, generally speaking, within organizations. It's only when we get to very small businesses do we lose the hierarchy. A very small business may have the owner who is working in the business, so the owner is also the shop floor worker. The owner is has the same function as the employee. So in very small businesses there is no delegation, generally speaking, very small, so the owner is involved at all stages. In larger organizations there will be delegation throughout the organization, with responsibility being passed to various levels within the organization. There's also something we need to take account of, is this idea of the span of control. That means how many subordinates, how many workers is each manager responsible for. That's his or her span of control. Some managers may have very few working under him or her. For example, in product development, maybe perhaps a department for product development, there may be very highly trained and highly skilled individuals, but there may be very few of them within that department trying to develop new products and come up with new ideas for the company to consider. But there's a small span of control there. Whereas in, let's say, in production, in large car producers, in the production of cars, there may be thousands and thousands of people. Well, individual managers may have a very large span of control. They may look after many. And the more they look after, the more the case can be made for delegation. and the appointment of under managers to take on some of that responsibility. And we'll go back to it, the tall and flat organizations, which we need to bear in mind when we talk about authority, because ultimately it's the CEO or managing director who has the authority for just about everything within the business, has power over the business. But businesses can be complex, and the managing director or the CEO can't control everything, can't know everything. So the delegation starts there, going to perhaps functional area heads, and they are delegated then with all sorts of responsibilities, from employment, training, health and safety, quality, all sorts of issues go through those functional heads. But that in itself is very complex for them to handle, particularly if it's a large functional area. So they in turn may delegate to someone else within their section. So tall organizations have this delegation running right the way through, from CEO all the way through to the shop floor. Flat organizations, by contrast, the managing director or CEO is involved right throughout the business. The distance or the authority hierarchy is much shorter. So a person working on the shop floor or performing particular functions will be closer to the CEO, will perhaps know the CEO because the CEO is more involved and is working alongside these various employees. So it's a much flatter organization. It's not a big hierarchy ranging from different functions all the way up to the CEO. Flat organizations, all the employees are much closer to the CEO because there are fewer levels of management between them. So as I said, this is just a short video to revise, recap, and go across some of the ideas related to organizational structure. It's all we're going to deal with here. This should spark off an interest in the other videos and the area. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.